9 o'clock on C-SPAN 3, and then at 2 o'clock she'll be before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. That will also be on C-SPAN 3. Over in the House, we'll look today towards their vote coming up on the No Budget, No Pay Act. Here we go to the House floor. Thanks for joining us this morning.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. God of heaven and earth, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask your blessing upon the members of the People's House during these opening days of the first session of the 113th Congress. Bless the members of this assembly with wisdom, inspire them to act with justice, and empower them to work toward legislative solutions to the many challenges facing our nation. Bless all the people of our nation as they return to their homes following the celebrations of the past few days. May the work of their hands issue forth to the betterment of their own lives and the strength and vitality of their communities. And may all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal.
Questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal? Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The Journal is approved.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from California.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make the point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the Chair announces to the House that in light of the resignation of the gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Emerson, the whole number of the House is now 432. The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches from each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise the semi remarks.
Without objection.
You know that's like, why don't you? Mr. Speaker, today I'm introducing legislation to put an end to the defined benefit retirement plan currently available to members of Congress. These are extremely difficult economic times. We are in a debt crisis that will require sacrifices on the part of all Americans. I served in both the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps, and I was taught that leaders should never ask others to do anything that they themselves would be unwilling to do. Congress needs to set an example and lead the way for the country. I think ending the congressional pension system is a good start. My legislation will honor any retirement benefits accrued prior to the passage of this bill and will keep Social Security and the Thrift Savings Plan in place for members of Congress. I believe that members of Congress should feel the same economic pressures the rest of society does, and I firmly believe that the current effort to reduce spending and constrain the size and scope of government requires that all possible solutions be taken, including cuts to the congressional budget. I urge the passage of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman
Mr.
from...
Speaker, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to be able to revise and extend.
Without objection. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor a dedicated educator, a true Miami treasure, a man who inspired me and many others, Mr. Pat Collins. Mr. Collins has been a social studies teacher and a department head at Belen Jesuit Preparatory School since 1971. Currently teaching AP U.S. Government and Politics and U.S. Government, Mr. Collins moderates Belen's chapter of Amnesty International. Pat is an instrumental success to Belen Jesuits' Model United Nations program and founded the Overseas Study Program in 1994 and teaches civic responsibility to his students. A chapter member of the charter member of the U.S. Historical Society, Pat has received numerous awards, including the Cornell University Outstanding Educator and the Close-Up Foundation's Linda Meyer Chosen Award for Teaching Excellence in Civics. Mr. Collins has inspired and educated many thousands of students, many of whom serve in public service like myself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition? Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Yes, unanimous consent.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, let me rise to announce bipartisan legislation that my good friend and colleague Terry Sewell and I are introducing today to honor the 4 little girls that were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham with the Congressional Gold Medal. This year marks the 50th anniversary of this pivotal event in the history of the Civil Rights Movement, which less than a year later resulted in the passage of the Civil Rights Act. We know today that the evil that occurred in this place of God on September 15, 1963, galvanized the conscience of the nation and led to the passage of laws to ensure equal rights for every American. The innocent young children killed in the bombing, Addie Mae Collins, Carolyn Robinson, Cynthia Wesley, Denise McNair, were eulogized as martyred heroes by Dr. Martin Luther King, and it is fitting and proper that this Congress recognize the historic significance of their life. Ironically, they were studying about the love and forgiveness of God at the time of their death. Let us be mindful that despite this act of violence and the killing of a young 16-year-old black boy and 14-year-old black boy the same day, the civil rights leaders were committed to nonviolence, and they kept true to that commitment. Despite the violence done to them, they showed forgiveness against the people. And our colleague John Lewis and others helped us avoid, by their commitment to nonviolence, the calamities and replaying of grievances that have destroyed the fabric of many other countries. To them, we should be eternally grateful. In closing, let this legislation bring us together, and I commend your support for it and ask for your co-sponsorship.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, consider the following. If the United States had an adopted policy of equal pay, it would put $200 billion more into the economy every year. That comes out to about $137 for every white woman per paycheck and approximately $300 for every woman of color who are doubly discriminated against. These women are not going to put their money into a Cayman Islands bank account. Instead, they'll spend it, and this will boost our economy, create jobs, and help families. With a record number of women in the workforce, wage discrimination hurts the majority of American families, both in terms of their economic security today and their retirement security tomorrow. The Institute of Women's Policy Research found that wage disparity will cost women anywhere from $400,000 to $2 million over a lifetime of lost wages. That means fewer resources to pay the mortgage, send kids to college, or have a decent retirement. That's why I support the Paycheck Fairness Act. It ensures that employers who try to justify paying a man more than a woman for the same job must show that disparity is not sex-based. The House of Representatives should address this issue. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the primary reason why the government is in economic turmoil destroying jobs is due to a lack of fiscal responsibility. The House has fulfilled the most basic responsibility of governing and passing a budget. On the other hand, the liberal-controlled Senate has failed to complete a budget for nearly 4 years. Hard-working American families and small businesses plan to spend within their means and abide by a budget. The federal government should do as well. Today, House Republicans will consider legislation aimed at putting this fiscal irresponsibility to a halt by voting on the No Budget, No Pay Act. This bill will raise the debt ceiling for 3 months with the provision that both houses of Congress must pass a budget. If either body fails to achieve the task, the members' pay will be withheld. It is past time to hold the President and the liberal-controlled Senate accountable for out-of-control spending. If hardworking Americans strive to succeed in their jobs, the Senate must do theirs as well. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court decision that formally recognized a woman's right to make decisions regarding her own reproductive health care. On January 22, 1973, this monumental decision came as a result of decades of relentless activism and litigation on the part of great women advocates. But today, there are still those who would prefer to roll back these fundamental rights and turn the clock back on women's health care. We've seen them use the same tactics over and over again during the last 40 years. In fact, according to the Guttmacher Institute, more than 40 laws were passed to restrict access to abortion in 19 states just this past year. That's why, as we commemorate the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, it's more important than ever to commit ourselves to protecting these basic rights and ensuring that women across our country have full control over their personal well-being and health and retain access to any health care services they require. I thank you and yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the House is poised to pass H.R. 325 today. I respect the sincerity of its supporters, but I must firmly dissent. This bill accommodates spending at ruinous levels far beyond the limits set by the House budget. It sets a terrible precedent by abolishing the debt limit for nearly 4 months, giving an unlimited credit card to this administration. I think members will be stunned by the borrowing that this moratorium makes possible. Certainly thousands of dollars of new debt will be heaped on every household in America. Now, House Republicans have passed 2 budget plans that put our nation back on a path toward fiscal solvency. If the debt limit were increased within that trajectory at 2-month intervals, it would require only small and incremental reforms each time. That would both avert default now and the fiscal crisis that we are fast approaching. I believe that's achievable and far preferable to the bill to be voted on today.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Alabama seek recognition?
I rise to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this year marks the 50th commemoration of the City of Birmingham's pivotal role in the Civil Rights Movement. We're declaring 2013 as the year of Birmingham to honor the historic events that occurred in our city in 1963. The city of Birmingham serves as a reminder to the rest of the world that out of despair there is hope, and justice does indeed prevail. My good friend Congressman Spencer Backus and I, along with the entire Alabama delegation, plan to ask this august body to bestow on a bipartisan basis its highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal, to the 4 little girls who tragically lost their lives during the 1963 bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church. We believe it is befitting that during this year, 2013, we pay tribute to Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wellesley, Carolyn Robertson, and Denise McNair posthumously for they have truly paid the ultimate sacrifice. They are indeed emblematic of so many in Birmingham, citizens of Birmingham, who lost their lives for the cause of freedom. They represent all of those citizens and all of those who fought so hard and courageously, black and white, to make sure that we have, in this nation, hold up its ideals of equality for all. I ask that this august body work with Spencer Backus and the entire delegation to bipartisanly support and bestow upon them the Congressional Medal of Honor.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Tennessee seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a charter member of the Fix Congress Now caucus and an early supporter of the No Budget, No Pay, I am very excited that this legislation will be voted on the House later today. We on the House Budget Committee work hard to pass a responsible budget each year, but the Democrat-controlled Senate refuses to do the same. In fact, it has been nearly 4 years since the Senate has passed a budget. And since that time, the federal government has racked up annual deficits exceeding $1 trillion. In total, more than $5 trillion has been added to our national debt in just 4 years. If we stay on our current path of record deficits, big government, and unfunded entitlement programs, Greece's present will be America's future. A massive debt crisis is surely not the future we want for our children or our grandchildren. Fiscal responsibility and accountability in the halls of Congress cannot wait. Today, we will take an important step in the House to force the Senate to either do its job or face its consequences. It's simple. No budget, no pay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I request the unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, after the massacre of 20 children and 6 educators in Connecticut, we've heard the predictable rantings of people who are convinced beyond all reason and evidence that the federal government intends to take their guns away. I am sad that they have succumbed to the fear-mongering of the National Rifle Association and others who really only want to sell more guns. But it's more than sad. Frankly, it's dangerous when a government leader stoops to the same fear-mongering for political purposes. Last week, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's campaign sent out an email titled, "Watch out, they're coming for your guns." Among the email's dishonest claims was this blatant distortion. Quote, President Obama is spelling out the 23 different executive orders he will take to get your guns. Those 23 executive actions are so modest that even gun rights activists said they had no problem with them. In fact, many of them reflect proposals made by the NRA. Even if we give Senator McConnell the benefit of the doubt as to whether he actually knew what his campaign manager was putting out, he is responsible, as we all are, for what our employees do in our name. I call on Senator McConnell to apologize to his supporters, some of whom are my constituents, for stoking totally irrational and unjustifiable fear. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Resolution 39, I call up H.R. 325 to ensure the complete and timely payment of obligations of the United States government.
Does the gentleman mean to call up the rule?
I do.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 2, House Resolution 39. Resolved, that upon the adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 325, to ensure the complete and timely payment of the obligations of the United States government until May 19, 2013, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended, and on any amendment thereto to final passage, without intervening motion except 1 hour of debate, with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration, and 2, 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman, my friend from Worcester, Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
All time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 325.
Without objection.
Today's debate is about one very simple but profoundly important goal, Mr. Speaker, and that is restoring our vibrant economy by reducing the crippling weight of the growing debt caused by our federal government. In the coming months, we face a string of deadlines that will force Congress and the administration to address the fundamental challenge of our trillion-dollar deficit and its mounting effect on our economy and jobs in America. We've already exceeded the $16 trillion in debt, and Republicans find this debt level absolutely unacceptable, and that is why we are here today. By contrast, President Obama seems to be perfectly comfortable with the idea of reaching $23 trillion, which is where we'll be at the end of his second term if we continue his policies in that direction. While $16 trillion is debt is stifling our economy, $23 trillion would crush it. It would crush the dreams and hopes and aspirations of our great nation and the people who will certainly follow us, our children and our grandchildren. That's why today we are considering this rule and the underlying bill in order to reverse this course. Our great Speaker, John Boehner, and our Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, are pleased that this bill is on the floor today to discuss not just this important activity with our members of Congress, but to let the American people know we are serious about what needs to be done to save this country from this crippling debt. We will use the upcoming weeks and the looming deadlines before us as a means to enacting a more meaningful and lasting reform so that we can begin to grapple with this skyrocketing debt. At the same time, today's rule and the underlying bill will allow us to turn up pressure on the Senate to join the House in offering real solutions. Together, these actions will help to reignite our engines of grow our economy and to restore discipline and accountability to our federal budget. The first of the looming deadlines we face is the debt ceiling limit. The underlying bill would temporarily suspend this limit so that we have the opportunity to craft comprehensive reforms without risking debt and default on this debt that our nation has incurred. Risking default would be counterproductive to our Republican agenda of restoring economic growth, getting our fiscal house in order, and ensuring that we do not burden future generations with intolerable debt. We will not risk the full faith and credit of the United States, but neither will we compromise a long-term extension of this debt ceiling without slashing wasteful federal spending, enacting meaningful entitlement reform, and ending the era of trillion-dollar deficits. By taking this temporary action, we are keeping the focus where it is needed and where it's intended and help resolving the coming debates on sequestration, the expiring continuing resolution, and the FY14 budget through fiscal discipline and entitlement reform. Suspending the debt ceiling until May the 19th provides the House and the Senate with much-needed time to pass their budgets and then consider how best to deal with the sequester. The underlying bill also takes action to ensure that the Senate becomes an active partner, which we want and need, and the American people, I think, expect, in order for our efforts to reform federal spending. For nearly 4 years, the Senate has failed to meet its most basic obligation, passing a budget. During this time, the Senate has collected its own paychecks despite being derelict in its most important duty. In the private sector, there are consequences for failing to do one's job. This resolution will impose the same accountability on members of Congress that the private sector workers face. Oh, yes, and we're putting that same obligation on the House as we would want them to accept in the Senate. That is, if you don't get your work done, you don't get paid. The power of the purse is the most fundamental duty the Constitution places upon Congress. Far too long, this power has not been wielded with the discipline and accountability necessary to do responsibly and sustaining the efforts of our country properly. There are a host of challenges that must be addressed, but the entire process begins with a joint budget resolution. And as long as the Senate is unwilling or unable to do its job, our efforts in the House to deliver real solutions to the American people will continue to be impeded. Some have questioned whether the action we are taking is constitutional. The 27th Amendment of the Constitution prohibits legislation that varies the salary of members of current Congress. This provision was intended to prevent members of the House and the Senate from giving themselves a pay raise without first standing before the voters. This bill upholds both the letter and the spirit of the 27th Amendment. It would not change a member's rate of compensation in any way. They just don't get to collect it until they do their jobs. And until they get their work done, we simply cannot adopt a permanent extension to that debt ceiling. This body will work to ensure that the Senate performs the most basic task to pass a budget, and will do our job also. We will continue to work for meaningful entitlement and spending reforms to take us beyond our current cycle of crisis and deadlines in favor of long-term solutions. And as we do all this in order to invigorate our economy and to put our nation back to prosperity for ourselves and for future generations, I urge my colleagues to support this rule and to the underlying legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, the new chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Sessions, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me say to my colleagues, both Democratic and Republican colleagues, that they ought to vote against this rule. The bill before us today was not the product of deliberation in either the Ways and Means Committee or the House Administration Committee. There were no hearings. It was brought before the Rules Committee last night, and not a single amendment was made in order. This is a closed rule. So if my friend from Texas wants to usher in a new policy of openness in this Congress, we should have had this rule open so that members could have an opportunity to express themselves and to have their viewpoints made known. But again, it is a completely closed rule. So this rule should be defeated. It should go back to the Rules Committee. We ought to come back with something that allows this chamber to be able to do its deliberation. And, Mr. Speaker, we ought to be here today to raise the debt ceiling, not because we like the idea of raising the debt ceiling, but because that's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do for our country and for our economy. It is the right thing to do for the businesses of this country so that they have some certainty that we will not default on our debts. And if they had that certainty, they would then invest in our economy and help create more jobs and help create more opportunity for people. You know, one of the things I have heard from Republicans and Democrats, you know, who I've bumped into in all kinds of occasions, they may have differences on our tax policy, they may have differences on our economic policy, but the one thing that everybody seems to agree on is that Congress ought to provide certainty. And this is anything but certainty, because what we are doing today, thanks to the Republican leadership, is to bring a short-term extension of the debt ceiling to the floor, which means that they have decided once again to play partisan politics with the debt ceiling. This is a bad idea. This is not the way a mature governing body ought to behave. We ought to do our job. Next month, the United States will hit the debt ceiling, and without action, the United States will default on its debts. Now, the last time the Republican leadership played this dangerous game of economic Russian roulette, they threatened the full faith and credit of the United States for the first time in our history. For some reason, they seem hell-bent on doing it again. We need to be clear about one thing. The debt limit is not about new spending. It's not about increasing the deficit. The debt limit is simply the way Congress pays for things that we have already bought. Things like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. By the way, that my friends on the other side continue to insist that we don't pay for. It just goes on our credit card. Things like the Medicare prescription drug benefit that was not paid for, that my friends on the other side of the aisle championed. Things that the Republicans have voted for over and over and over again. Now, we can and we should have an open and thoughtful debate about our spending priorities and our deficit. That is what we're supposed to do. But playing games with the debt limit, threatening to default, should not be an option. But that's just what the bill before us does. It once again kicks the can down the road. Now, instead of passing a clean, long-term debt ceiling bill, one that could ensure that America doesn't default on its debt and obligations, the Republicans have chosen to bring a bill that would put us right back in the same place that we're in now in May, 3 months from now. So what's next, Mr. Speaker? A 3-week extension of the debt ceiling? 3 days? 3 hours? My Republican friends go on and on about how the business community needs and deserves certainty from Washington. But treating the full faith and credit of the United States like just another political talking point is no way to create certainty. How ironic, Mr. Speaker, that the Republican Party, the party that took a record surplus and turned it into a record deficit, the party that put 2 major wars on the nation's credit card, the party that refused to pay for 2 rounds of tax cuts and a massive, expansive prescription drug benefit, now wants to pay its bills. Now wants to pay its bills. The same group of people that got us into this mess are now telling us that they want to get us out of this mess. The fact is, on the issue of the deficit and on the issue of the debt, my friends on the other side of the aisle, I do not believe have any credibility. You know, there's an old show business saying, Mr. Speaker, you got to have a gimmick. And my Republican friends never cease to disappoint me. They always have a gimmick. They believe in government by gimmicks. And this, you know, no budget, no pay bill is another gimmick. Let's kind of play this out. What their bill says is if the House doesn't pass a budget bill by April 15th, we don't get paid. If the Senate doesn't pass a budget bill by April 15th, they don't get paid. Now, I have no doubt that they have the votes to ram whatever they want through the House of Representatives, and I expect that they will bring us yet another budget bill that has the same extreme, excessive spending cuts and programs that benefit the middle class and poor that they brought before us last year. So I think they will bring a bill to the floor. Now, let's say the Senate does bring a budget bill to the floor, and they pass it. This bill does not require that there be a conference report that is voted on by both the House and the Senate as a condition to whether or not members get paid. So, again, this is not a solution. What this is just, you know, more political gamesmanship. You pass something in the House and may be totally irreconcilable. something that will never be able to be conferenced with the Senate. Senate, you pass whatever you want. Doesn't have to be conferenceable with the House, and there we are. And here we are, there we are 3 months from now in the same position that we are in now. You know, the way this should be done, and this is a radical idea, but the way this should be done is the leadership of the Republican side should speak with the leadership of the Democratic side, and let's see if we can kind of agree on a way to proceed. There ought to be serious discussions. I'll also point out for my colleagues and for those who are watching, you know, there were a couple of occasions over the last year and a half where Speaker Boehner came very close to coming to an agreement with the White House on a bigger deal. And on those 2 occasions, the Speaker walked away and said no after he came very close to saying yes. Why did he say no? It had nothing to do with the Senate not having passed the budget resolution. It had everything to do with the fact that when the Speaker came back and talked to his Republican rank-and-file members, they all said no. They said no. It doesn't cut Medicare enough. It doesn't cut Social Security enough. It doesn't cut food stamps enough. It doesn't cut education enough. It doesn't cut job creation enough. There are people on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, who are using this not as an opportunity to balance our budget, but they're using this as an opportunity to gut government, to end the public sector. They see this as their opportunity. And as a result, we have this uncertainty. And as a result, the American people pay the price. As a result, this economy is not recovering as quickly as it needs to be. I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule, this close rule. This is not the way we should begin this session. And Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, enough of the gimmicks. It's time to get serious about doing the people's business. This is not doing the people's business. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from the Washington Post dated January 22nd, 2013.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to now discuss, if I can, this Washington Post article which is out today, which says the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid praised House leaders for moving ahead with a bill that would give the government borrowing authority into the future. He further said that he not only is very glad that we're going to send a clean debt ceiling bill, but that he felt like it would be good for the Senate to be able to take up this action. Well, Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is to empower those things that we know this institution, the House and the Senate, where we work closer together, where we both do our work. And yesterday, the gentleman representing the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Ryan, who's also Paul Ryan, the chairman of the House Budget Committee, in testimony said that he intended to make sure that he would produce a bill exactly supporting what we are trying to do here today, and would bring that to the floor and would be faithful in doing that. Look, maybe people are upset that we're putting their pay at risk. Maybe people are upset because it wasn't their idea. But the bottom line is that Paul Ryan, John Boehner, Eric Cantor, the Rules Committee yesterday said, we think it's a good bill. And we were joined by Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader. When the Senate Majority Leader can agree with Republicans about a great direction to go that will empower the Senate and join with them in trying to make sure that we get our job done, I think that's a rare day. I think that's a good day when we can work together, when we can bring legislation that the Senate openly welcomes, and, might I add, and the President of the United States, President Obama, would sign this legislation, and he said so in the Statement of Administration Policy. I reserve my time.
Time is reserved. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I'm glad the gentleman from Texas agrees with Harry Reid. I hope he agrees with Harry Reid on more things in the future. But the fact of the matter is this show business before us does nothing other than postpone this debate on the debt ceiling for 3 months. It doesn't require a finished product. It does not require that we actually have something that amounts to a deal that goes to the President's desk. This is, you know, the House will pass their extreme budget like they always do. The Senate hopefully will probably do something, and then nothing else is required. There's no requirement for a deal in order to get your pay. I mean, this is show business. This is show business. And what we should be doing is providing certainty to the business community that we're not going to default on our obligations in 3 months. And we ought to come together and figure out a way to be able to get this budget in balance without destroying the social safety net in this country. Again, the problem has always been, and let's be clear about this, as much as I get frustrated with the Senate, the problem on this is not the Senate. The problem is the rank and file Republicans in the House Republican Conference, who every time the Speaker of the House goes to them with a deal, they say no. They always say it doesn't cut deep enough. It doesn't eliminate programs that help the poor. It doesn't eliminate programs that help the middle class. It doesn't eliminate programs that help create jobs. Because the ultimate goal of so many on the other side is not about a balanced budget. They don't care about balanced budgets. They're the ones who took this balanced budget that Bill Clinton gave and turned it into the worst deficits and debt in the history of our country. They don't care about that. They care about eliminating the public sector. That's what this is about. And 3 months, please. 3 months, what kind of certainty is that? At this point, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield as much time as she may consume to the gentlewoman from New York, the distinguished ranking member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Slaughter.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for yielding to me, and I want to continue what he was saying, despite the fact I've got a great speech here. But it's terribly important, I think, that we try to make the point one more time. The process here is turned upside down and is totally meaningless. So John Boehner and Paul Ryan and Harry Reid and the Rules Committee all agree. That leaves out about 500 more people who have been sent here and from the districts to represent what the people who live there think. This is not the first time this has happened. A couple of weeks ago on the fiscal cliff, we had a thing that came up from nowhere called Plan B. John Boehner liked that. I guess Paul Ryan liked that. I'm not sure what Harry Reid thought about that. But the Rules Committee thought it was okay. But the fact of the matter is that that bill was written while the Rules Committee was in session. There are 13 of us on Rules Committee, and we love the enormous power that we've got. But I don't believe any of us ever suspected that the Rules Committee was going to supersede all of the committees in the House of Representatives. There's been no committee action on any of this. In addition, I want to make the point again that despite what we tried to do, we said nobody's talked about this. There's been no discussion on this. Let's have an open rule. Let's let not just the people on our side, but the people on the Republican side who've had no input here as well. Let's open it up and have a real debate and see what's going on here. What is going on here? What's going on here, as my colleague points out, is a circus of dubious constitutional validity, frankly. Some people may say it's okay what they're doing. Other people say absolutely not. We certainly should have had that decision before we got this far. What will the Senate do with it? Heavens to Betsy, I don't know. They have to have 60 votes over there before they can get to anything. It is the only legislative body in the world where 60 is the majority, not 51, as it is in every other limb. So we've just reached, I think, a new low today. I am very depressed by the fact that the Constitution of the United States, which is very specific, that the rules of the Congress, which are extremely specific, are meaningless here. We have all these people in the committees, people with expertise, wonderful staff. We can draw on resources from all over, probably the world, not just America, but we've got plenty of them here just a block away. All the people we can talk to, all the people we can ask, what is the meaning of this? What will it do to the economy of the United States of America? Are we on the right track? Should we be doing something different? Do we need a debt limit law? What are we doing? Why can't we have those kinds of discussions in this Congress ever again? It's as though if we give them time to think about it, and everybody has a chance to weigh in on it, then maybe we won't be able to move this the way we'd like to and play another gotcha game, which is really what it comes down to. I don't care if the Washington Post loves it. They're probably so pleased to see the fact that people believe that there's something, the fact that Harry Reid said he liked it. It was not anything that's been heard here lately, that they thought they would like it as well. But I don't know what it is, and I don't think any of the rest of my members did. We certainly did not yesterday in the Rules Committee. We did not have the benefit of the knowledge of any of the other members of the Congress, of the committee process, which could have answered the questions for us that came up yesterday. In fact, all of us know, we know where this came from. Charles Krauthammer wrote a column in the Washington Post. They may be like that a whole lot as well. That's where this came from. He said, hey, there's a good idea. Instead of going to the committees of the Congress of the United States, where people of knowledge are seated, they decided, let's just throw it together over the weekend at a retreat, and we'll take it back next week. We're only going to work a couple days, so let's rush it through and get it through, and maybe by the time we get to 3 months, something will have straightened out. Or, more likely, Mr. Speaker, in 3 months we will have thought of another way that we can kick the can down the road. Now, it's important to note that this is not an extension of debt limit. It is a suspension of debt limit. That makes a difference, I think, as well, but we didn't get a chance to discuss that part of it either. But we did away with all notions of regular order, and I really thought the Plan B, as I'd said earlier, and I don't want anybody to miss this, that bill was being written while the Rules Committee was meeting. I know that all the students of government, all the colleges and universities in this country, they're out there teaching people how America runs, how carefully and wonderfully put together it was by the Founding Fathers, how our Constitution is our guiding light. We just celebrated that, because without doubt the President's inaugural speech, based so closely on the Declaration of Independence and talking about the Constitution, made us understand that that is what we are here to uphold. And indeed, we all held up our hands and swore we would uphold it. But when it comes to a piece of legislation like this is the same as I said last night in the Rules Committee. It's just lurching around and jerking around and coming up with any kind of crazy gimmick we can think of and making smart remarks. But I will tell you that kicking the can down the road for 3 more months is not a solution. It gives us some breathing room, but I don't have any reason in the world to believe from past performance that the future is going to be any clearer for us. But until the leaders of the House can start to include the fellow members in the majority, because they've been cut out as well, and the minority in the legislative process, the regular order will be little more than a dream. And today's bill drops the majority's insistence that increasing the debt limit be matched by cuts to Medicare or reductions to education funding. That's a step forward, but it doesn't answer our questions. My Democrat colleagues and I are eager to participate in the legislative process for which we came to Washington. And the American people are certainly eager. If not eager, maybe desperate would be a better word, to see an end to this dysfunction in this Congress. I hope that at some point the majority will realize that a completely partisan approach, which is what we've had, is a dead end. That meaningful solutions can only come from negotiation and compromise with those on the other side of the aisle who do have some good ideas. And when the majority comes to that realization, my Democrat colleagues and I will happily join in the effort to craft the serious legislative answers our country needs, our constituencies deserve, and the world expects of us. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the gentlewoman, the ranking member of the committee, who was very faithful and sat through not only the hearing yesterday, but offered her feedback to our speakers who came to the Rules Committee representing the House Administration Committee and representing the Ways and Means Committee. And I thought that her questions and her tone was very appropriate. I think that yesterday that the 2 Republican lead representatives, a gentlewoman from Michigan, Candace Miller, representing the House Administration Committee, and the gentleman from Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Ryan adequately not only spoke about, Mr. Speaker, a 5-page bill, 5 pages, that we could not only understand but offer the ideas, regardless of who came up with the idea, offer the idea that represents what I hope will be and believe will be more than 218 votes, and I think will be bipartisan. These ideas don't just belong to somebody and we can't share them. They belong to the American people about a way to move forward, avoiding conflict, working together, coming up with ideas that you can express with great confidence that we believe that will work. Yesterday during the hearing we also had some thoughtful conversation. I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the Rules Committee designee, to Chairman Ryan, and the Budget Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my chairman for yielding. I used to come to this podium, Mr. Speaker, and say, you know, I'm just a House freshman, but this is what I think about things. I'm now a House sophomore. It's been 2 years and 1 month since I arrived here, and if you'd told me 2 years ago when I arrived that we were going to be bringing 5-page pieces of legislation to this floor for up or down votes by this body, I wouldn't have believed it, because I've watched the way this House has operated for over a decade, and I see these bills, and Mr. Speaker, you've seen them too, these bills that folks have to carry down here on a dolly, those bills that they drop them back here on the rostrum with just a thump. Folks can't read those bills, folks can't analyze those bills, folks can't digest those bills, but this one that we have today deals with an incredibly complicated topic, the debt ceiling, an incredibly controversial topic, how it is that the House and the Senate get their business done, and yet we bring it in 5 pages that every member of this body has had a chance to read and digest. Every member of this body. We had a hearing on it in the Rules Committee yesterday, and here on the floor today we're going to debate this bill not just with one committee of jurisdiction, with the Ways and Means Committee getting time, but with 2 committees of jurisdiction, the Ways and Means Committee getting time and the House Administration Committee getting time. You know, it's unusual, Mr. Speaker, that we have a bill that the Speaker of the House has decided to bring forward, that the Majority Leader of the Senate has praised the Speaker for bringing forward, and the White House has said it doesn't have any objection to. That's unusual, and candidly it makes me a little suspicious. And that's the way it's been around here. And I think my colleagues on the Rules Committee would agree. So often we get so used to the controversy that if we can't fight about something, we start to wonder what's wrong. What's wrong that we can't fight about something? I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have that opportunity to fight. We don't have that roadmap yet. Of course, the House has laid out its budget roadmap year after year after year after year. Certainly the 2 years I've been here, the House has done its job, much to the credit of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and passed a budget. This year, rumor has it, the Senate's going to do the same thing. This bill certainly puts an incentive in place for both the House and the Senate to get their job done, but how is it that we're going to tackle those tough decisions that my friend from New York, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, talked about, those really difficult financial decisions, talking about those obligations we have in the future that we have absolutely no plan or means to pay for? How are we going to grapple with those decisions? Well, I'll tell you. I wish we'd gotten the big deal in the debt ceiling debate of August of 2011. We got a step in the right direction, but we didn't get it all done. I wish we'd gotten it in the Joint Select Committee. We didn't get it done. I wish we'd gotten it in the fiscal cliff debate of last year. We didn't get it done. But I believe, maybe it's just a hope, Mr. Speaker, but I believe that if the Senate has the courage to lay out its path for America, its path for America's budget and dealing with America's obligations, and if the House has the courage to lay out its vision for America, its vision of dealing with America's obligations, that we're going to find that opportunity to come together to make those decisions that have to happen. I hope I'm not speaking out of school, Mr. Speaker, but I had a chance for some constituents in town, some of my business leaders, some of the great entrepreneurs from my district. They were in town. I took them by to meet with Speaker John Boehner. And I'll tell you, I come from one of the most conservative districts in the United States of America. Speaker John Boehner is not always the most popular name in my district. But I brought him by to meet him because I wanted him to hear from him directly, and he said this to him. He said, we have real opportunities in divided government, real opportunities to come together and do the big things that matter. That only in divided government can you bring together the best ideas from both sides and put everybody's fingerprint and stamp of approval on them and do those things that really make a difference for America. And my goal is to do those things while I'm leading this, the People's House. I take him at his word, Mr. Speaker. And if giving this 90-day extension so that budgets can be passed gives him that opportunity, I'll do it. A colleague of mine yesterday said, and it stuck with me, he said, I've had people I respect a whole lot less ask me for a whole lot more. I have great respect for our Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan. I have great respect for our Rules Committee Chairman Pete Sessions. I have great respect for the Speaker of the House. If they tell me another 90 days is going to give us that opportunity to do those big things that I think we on both sides of the aisle want to do, I'm there. I support this resolution, Mr. Speaker, and I hope for folks will support the underlying bill. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I want to say to my colleague from Georgia that I appreciate his many years working here in Washington, not only as a member of Congress, but his many years as a congressional aide. So you have a perspective here based on many years of service in Washington. But I would just say that if someone were to tell me that the Republican leadership were going to bring yet another closed rule to the floor, I'm sad to say that I'd respond, I'm not surprised. This is a closed rule. This is a bill, whether it's 5 pages or 100 pages, it doesn't make any difference, that did not come out of a committee process. The Ways and Means Committee didn't hold hearings or a markup. The House Administration Committee didn't hold hearings or a markup. This did, as my colleague from New York said, basically come out of your retreat and you hand a bill to all of us here. And what's even more startling is that you do not allow anybody, Democrats or Republicans, to amend it. Completely closed. Completely closed. Look, I would say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, especially the freshmen, who campaigned on the platform of openness and transparency, you vote for this rule, you're the problem. You're the problem if you vote for this rule. And so I would again urge my colleagues, just on the process alone, this is not the way that we should proceed. The other thing I would remind my friends who were saying that somehow this is going to produce a result, this doesn't require a result. This requires the House to once again pass its budget, which, as we all know from last year's experience, represents the extreme of the extreme. I mean, it's irreconcilable with the Senate, and the Senate can pass whatever they want. But it doesn't require a finished product. And what the American people want is a finished product, not a gimmick to kick the can down the road for 3 months. Yeah, everybody is happy we're not going to default today, but 3 months, that's it. I mean, I think we can do a heck of a lot better than this. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Asking announcers to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman and members of the House, at the end of the day, when we vote today, we will simply be voting to kick the can down the road, which every member of this House has told their constituents they no longer wanted to do. But we will kick the can down the road on the question of the debt limit of the United States and whether or not the full faith and credit of the United States will stand behind the bills that we owe the rest of the world, the businesses in our company, individuals, people's retirement plans. That's all this bill does. Under some sort of camouflage about withholding pay, what have you, they kick the can down. You know, Americans are starting to realize that their economy is starting to recover after the devastation of the housing scandals, of the Wall Street scandals. Small businesses are starting to hire. Spending over Christmas was reasonably good. The stock market is at a 5-year high. Housing market is coming back. Builders are, in fact, building new homes because of the demand in housing. And all of a sudden, enter the Congress of the United States, and says that we're going to put the full faith and credit of the United States of America on a 90-day leash. We're going to take the greatest economy in the greatest country with the greatest responsibilities in the world, and we're going to put them on a 90-day leash. How does a great country respond on a 90-day leash? We know how it responded last time in the world when they saw this happen. We got downgraded in the credit rating. That drove up the borrowing cost of the United States. That drove up the borrowing cost of corporations. That drove up the borrowing cost of counties and cities, the counties and the cities that we represent. And we're told again that should we falter on the credit debt of the United States, that we can expect a downgrade, and we can expect a further downgrade in cities and counties all over the country. And somehow we're supposed to believe that this is a good plan. What this plan does, I asked him if I had 3 additional minutes.
I yield the gentleman 2 additional minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 2 minutes.